an idol to millions, a songwriter for legends, a man who defied an entire industry and came out on top. Yet, what if the man behind the music was a complete stranger to us all? At 84 years old, the life of Paul Anka is a story of fame, fortune, and untold success. But it's also a story of deep, personal struggles that played out far from the spotlight. The teen idol who wrote songs that defined a generation found that his greatest hits came with an even greater cost. Today, his life is a world away from the endless applause and sold-out stadiums. This is the truth behind the fame and the heartbreaking reality of how Paul Anka lives today. For most, the story of Paul Anka begins and ends with his iconic songs. But the true tale of his rise starts in a place few would expect: a quiet, close-knit family in Ottawa, Canada. Born in 1941 to parents of Lebanese descent, Paul was surrounded by a rich cultural life that would secretly shape his future. His father, a restaurant owner, and his mother, a loving homemaker, gave him a stable and traditional upbringing. What they didn't realize was that their home was the perfect training ground for a future star. The Anka household was a place of constant music and storytelling, with the rhythms of their heritage flowing through the air. This deep-rooted cultural influence was amplified at the St. Elijah Syrian Orthodox Church, where a young Paul first began to find his voice. At just 11 years old, singing in the church choir, he wasn't just performing, he was studying. He was learning how to connect with an audience, how to use his voice to create emotion, and how to command a room. Outside the church, he was a silent observer in his father's restaurant, watching local musicians perform and absorbing every detail. He wasn't just enjoying the music, he was deconstructing it. But the real secret to his success wasn't just his environment, it was his relentless ambition. Paul was a kid who knew what he wanted. Without any formal lessons, he taught himself piano and guitar by ear, driven by a natural curiosity and an unshakable belief in his own abilities. He formed a vocal group with friends, the Babasoxers, performing at local events and hunting his stage presence. He had musical heroes like Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, and Patti Page, but he didn't just listen to their songs. He studied them, learning about the emotional power of a well-written lyric. By the time he was a teenager, Paul's quiet passion had grown into a full-blown obsession. He was no longer just a kid with a dream, he was an artist on the verge of something spectacular. He was ready to leave the comfortable world he knew and throw himself into the cutthroat music industry, a move that would prove just how determined he was. And his big break was about to arrive far sooner than anyone could have ever guessed. While many kids were worried about school dances and homework, 14-year-old Paul Anka was on a mission. He convinced his parents to let him fly to Los Angeles, a bold move driven by an ambition that burned brighter than any teen romance. His goal wasn't just to visit his uncle, it was to break into the music business. He spent his time in LA not on sightseeing, but on networking, hustling his way into radio stations and recording studios, pushing to get his songs heard. He wasn't just a hopeful kid. He was a young man with a plan, relentlessly pursuing every lead and opportunity. This unwavering drive led to a pivotal meeting with Don Costa of ABC Paramount Records. Costa, a seasoned industry professional, saw something special in the teenager. It wasn't just his singing, but his raw songwriting talent and undeniable confidence. Paul was signed to the label, and his first single, a track called Blauwilde Ist die Fountain, was released. Unfortunately, it made no impact whatsoever. It was a complete flop, a brutal reminder of how difficult the industry could be. But Paul didn't let it stop him. He took the setback not as a failure, but as a lesson, and he channeled that energy into something new. Just 1 year later, in 1957, that persistence paid off in a way that would change his life forever. Paul wrote a song inspired by a girl he had a crush on, a classic tale of young, unrequited love. He poured his heart into the lyrics, capturing the longing and heartache of a love that felt out of reach. The song was called Diana, and when it was released, the world stopped and listened. It rocketed to the top of the charts, becoming an instant global sensation and selling millions of copies. At just 16 years old, Paul Anka was no longer just a kid from Ottawa. He was a bona fide superstar. But the success of Diana was just the beginning. He followed it up with a string of smash hits, each one cementing his status as the voice of a generation. Songs like You Are My Destiny, Lonely Boy, Put Your Head on My Shoulder, and Puppy Love all became anthems for teenagers everywhere. Paul wasn't just singing, he was capturing the universal feelings of falling in love and navigating heartbreak. His songs were simple, yet powerful, connecting with an entire demographic on a deeply personal level. He had become a teen idol, a heartthrob, and a hitmaker, all while still attending high school. His star had risen with dizzying speed, but his next chapter would reveal a talent far beyond the microphone, as he began writing for a legend whose music was a world away from his own. Beyond the screaming fans and chart-topping ballads, a more subtle and powerful career was taking shape. While the world saw Paul Anka as a teen idol, he was quietly becoming one of the most in-demand songwriters in the business, a ghostwriter for some of the biggest names in music. His genius wasn't just in singing his own hits. It was in his ability to create music that perfectly suited other artists, helping them define their own legacies. One of his most famous behind-the-scenes collaborations came in 1959. Paul penned a song for Buddy Holly, a rock and roll pioneer that was a world away from his usual pop sound. The song, "It Doesn't Matter Anymore," was a soft, sorrowful ballad about a broken relationship. Holly recorded it just weeks before his shocking death in a plane crash. The song became a posthumous hit, and in a gesture of immense respect and generosity, Paul donated all of his royalties from the song to Holly's widow. He wasn't just a songwriter, he was a class act, a man who understood the deeper meaning of music and the relationships it forged. Paul's versatility was truly put to the test in 1971 when he wrote a track for the powerful voice of Tom Jones. Unlike the gentle melodies of Diana, this song was a bold, brassy, and energetic anthem that perfectly matched Jones's lively stage presence. The result was "She's a Lady," a massive hit that became one of Jones's signature songs. This proved that Paul was no one-trick pony. He could write in any genre, for any artist, and still create a smash hit. But perhaps his most enduring, yet least recognized, work was for the small screen. In 1962, Paul composed an instrumental piece that would go on to be heard by millions every single night for decades. It was Johnny's Theme, the iconic opening music for The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Few viewers knew the man behind the catchy tune, but the fact that it became one of the most familiar pieces of music in television history speaks volumes about his influence. As the music world changed and teen idols faded, Paul didn't. He adapted, writing and producing for others, always one step ahead of the curve. And this ability to reinvent himself would soon lead him to his greatest and most meaningful partnership of all, a legendary icon and a song that would become the voice of a generation. The relationship between Paul Anka and Frank Sinatra was more than just a friendship. It was a bond between a mentor and a protege, a connection that would result in one of the most famous songs of all time. As a teenager, Paul looked up to Sinatra, not just as a singer, but as the very definition of a star. Their first meeting was a dream come true, and what followed was an unlikely friendship that transcended their age difference and status. Sinatra saw something in Paul, a work ethic, a deep respect for the craft, and a serious devotion to music. That earned him a spot in the icon's famously tight inner circle. The pinnacle of their partnership came in 1968. Paul was on a trip to France when he heard a catchy but lyrically simple tune called Comme de Habitude. As usual, he immediately recognized the power of the melody, but felt the words didn't capture the dramatic flair of a man like Frank Sinatra. In a moment of pure inspiration, Paul bought the rights to the music and went back to his hotel room. He wrote entirely new English lyrics, crafting a song that was, in essence, a biography of Sinatra himself. The lyrics spoke of living a life without regret, doing things on your own terms, and facing the end with pride. It was a deeply personal tribute, and when Sinatra heard it, he knew it had been written just for him. He recorded My Way in 1969, and the song became his signature anthem. For millions of people, it wasn't just a song. It was a statement, a philosophy, and a perfect musical summary of the legendary singer's life. My Way was played at his concerts, at public events, and even at his funeral. For Paul Anka, it was a moment of profound personal and professional triumph. He had not only written a commercial success, but had also created a work of art that captured the essence of a living legend. This achievement solidified his legacy as a songwriter and deepened a friendship that would last a lifetime. But as the music world began to change around them, the question became whether a pop singer from the 50s could survive a new era of rock and revolution. And the answer would prove just how smart and adaptable Paul Anka truly was. The 1960s and 70s were a graveyard for many of Paul Anka's peers. As the Beatles and the Rolling Stones led a tidal wave of rock and roll, the era of the clean-cut teen idol was brutally swept away. Yet, while other stars from his generation faded into obscurity, Paul Anka not only survived, he thrived. His secret wasn't a reinvention of his sound, but a radical reinvention of his role. He knew he couldn't compete with the new acts, so he stopped trying to. Instead, he went behind the scenes. Paul focused his energy on songwriting and producing, using his sharp business mind to stay relevant in a changing industry. He wrote hits for other artists, and he masterfully pivoted to a new audience, the adults who had grown up with his music. His smooth voice and emotional lyrics were a perfect fit for the emerging adult contemporary market, giving him a new home on the radio and a new chapter for his career. But perhaps his smartest move was taking his talent to Las Vegas. The city of bright lights became a sanctuary for classic entertainers, and Paul quickly became a main attraction. His Vegas shows were a mix of his old hits, new songs, and engaging stories, creating a powerful connection with a loyal and devoted audience. While other pop stars became footnotes, Paul was a living legend, a performer who understood how to adapt his act to survive. Just when everyone thought they had him figured out, Paul surprised them all once again. He made a series of bold, creative comebacks, including one project so unexpected it shocked the entire industry. But even as his professional life flourished, his personal life was falling apart. The fame he so masterfully managed on stage was taking a devastating toll on the people closest to him, leading to battles that would prove far more painful than any he faced in the music world. Behind the smile of a legend was a life filled with unseen scars. While Paul Anka was a master of his professional life, his personal relationships were often far more complicated, and the pressure of fame took a devastating toll. His first marriage, to Anne de Zogheb, lasted 37 years and produced 5 daughters. But his constant touring and demanding career created a distance that eventually became impossible to bridge. Though the split was amicable, it marked the end of a long chapter and hinted at the sacrifices he made for his career. But the real heartache was still to come. His second marriage, to Swedish model Anna Berg, was a world away from his first. Their relationship was brief and tumultuous, and it quickly became a public spectacle. The couple had a son, Ethan, but just 2 years after their wedding, the marriage imploded. What followed was a highly publicized legal fight and a bitter custody battle. The courts became a battleground of accusations, with both sides making serious claims. Paul fought relentlessly, believing he could offer his son a more stable home. After years of legal back and forth, Paul was awarded sole custody of Ethan in 2017, a rare outcome that he later described as one of the most important victories of his entire life. The win showed his fierce commitment to being a father, but it came at a high price. The emotional and financial exhaustion of the legal struggle left deep marks. In the end, while he won the battle, the war had left him profoundly affected. In recent years, Paul has become a more private figure, withdrawing from the public eye. His personal life reflects the emotional struggles of aging and the unique loneliness of a life lived in the spotlight. While his contact with some of his older children is limited, one relationship remains his true source of purpose: his deep bond with his son, Ethan. At a time when so many of his past connections have faded, his role as a father has kept him grounded. But the story of the man who gave us so many iconic songs is not a happy ending. It is a quiet, solitary conclusion, leaving him alone to reflect on a life of incredible highs and devastating lows. After a lifetime of standing in the spotlight, the final chapter of Paul Anka's story is a quiet, reflective one. Now in his 80s, the teen idol who once screamed across the globe lives a much more solitary life. He no longer performs with the same energy, and the days of constant touring are long gone. The relentless pace of his career, which brought him so much success, ultimately isolated him from the world he helped create. He's a living legend who feels like a stranger in an industry that has largely forgotten him. Despite his immense legacy, Paul's name is rarely mentioned in modern music circles. The younger generation knows little of the man who wrote My Way or Diana, and his contributions are often overlooked by award shows and tribute concerts. Emotionally, he's a man wrestling with the past, nostalgic for the highs, but also burdened by the lows. The bitter divorces, the legal battles, and the distance from some of his family have all left their mark, and he's often spoken about feeling alone. But in this quiet final act, he has found a renewed sense of purpose. His bond with his son, Ethan, remains the strongest and most important relationship in his life. At 84, Paul Anka is a man who proved you could survive in a cutthroat industry, but his life is a powerful reminder that while fame can get you everything you want, it can also cost you everything you have.